My name is Linda Sok. I'm a visual artist working with sculptural installations. I draw a lot of my inspiration from my Cambodian upbringing. My parents are from Cambodia and I was born in Australia. I am really interested in their migration from Cambodia to Australia as one that was by force. So looking at their forced migration as one that's kind of instigated a lot of loss, cultural loss of familial ties, loss of language. And I'm interested in a practice that works to bridge that loss and looking at this trauma from a generation down and trying to think through how I can continue that relationship, even though I am not necessarily a part of that culture anymore. I think the idea of it being from a generation down is quite important in my practice as well, because a lot of experiences that I speak about are not necessarily of my own, or if they are, it's like I've been shaped by the experiences of my parents within the context of being within a family and all of the things that come with that. So I'm really interested in ideas around migration and familial cultural ties and trying to bridge that gap. The work I'm showing in the Home and Away exhibition is one that I made in 2021 called Mending Fragments of a Memory. And it was made during a time that was during the pandemic. And I had just myself moved from Australia to the US and was living in the US and was looking at my migration and my family's migration, looking at the two, how I migrated for my own interests, whereas their migration was forced upon them. They didn't have a choice. So the work in the exhibition is made up of these materials, these fabrics that my aunt had brought home a very long time ago when she used to work as a seamstress in a factory. And she would bring home all of these scraps of materials, and she and my grandmother would sew them together to create quilts and blankets and different pieces of clothing. And it was a way of making something that would have gone to scrap into something that was used within the family home. These fabrics, over time, my grandmother and my aunt stopped working on them. My grandmother could no longer have the dexterity to be able to make those same stitches. So they sat for a while in my parents' home for maybe about 10 years. I was always interested in them. I was always interested in textiles and fabrics and their closeness to the body. I took those fabrics and in this cross-generational conversation with my grandmother and my aunt, I've sewn in these metal trinkets into the fabric and cut out some elements. It really relates to the way that my experiences of learning of their experiences have been quite fragmented. And a lot of the time it's me piecing together bits and pieces of their conversations to try to make sense of something that I don't have access to. It's a past that has gone and I will never be able to access it. So this was my attempt at reconciling that. So I've gone in and stitched a lot of these small metal trinkets. They're like flowers or spirals or different motifs that you see throughout all the blankets, and I've made them more tangible and more tactile. I was really inspired by the story that my mother tells me of my grandmother sewing gold jewelry into her clothing when she was escaping the war. That really stuck with me. And one of the things that she brought from Cambodia to Australia was this necklace that I used to really cherish, bite onto as a source of comfort. So you see a lot of this gold elements in it as both a way of connecting to this idea of offering and this preciousness, but also as a mode of comfort and something that is beautiful as well. So there is text that I have painted onto a lot of the underside of the blankets. Those were inspired by a conversation that I was having with my grandmother on my mother's side about her experiences during the war. Through my mother and her, we were all together in a room and having a conversation about what she had experienced. So my mother translating what I wanted to ask her to my grandmother, and then my grandmother telling me, and then my mother translating back to me, but also me listening to that conversation and trying to understand. I put a lot of what I understood in English and painted that onto the fabric. Then I sewed on top of those painted elements as a secret element that I have hidden behind. I would hope that people who speak Khmer would be able to unpack some of that text. So I've been working a lot with different types of textiles lately. This work in particular, I was really interested in textiles as a way that is able to speak about these really intimate stories within intimate spaces, often use materials that are from my childhood home. I think that materials have a way of holding on to something. Like the history is so embedded in textiles, it inevitably draws this energy into it, and I think they become incredibly powerful and charged. And for me, it is a way to connect to somebody. So the fabrics in this exhibition in particular are pieces that have traced the hands of my grandmother and of my aunt, and then now of me. And there is evidence of them being worked both on a machine and then hand stitched as well. And then you can see evidence of my own hand, and even on the backside of the piece, there are these constellations that happen when I'm going from one gold trinket to the next one and to the next one. So all of these are things that are like blankets or pieces of clothing. They are so closely related to my body and my family's bodies, and I wanted that to be almost a source of comfort as well as you're moving through space. My practice has always been a way for me to bridge a lot of the gaps that I have in terms of the space that I feel between myself and my culture, and the disconnect that I feel to a lot of the stories and the level of privilege that I have myself in having been born in a place where I don't have to struggle. When I was in Australia, I felt like it was almost this liminal space where I was not quite Australian, but I am Australian, and not quite Cambodian, but I am Cambodian. My practice is a way for me to like combine all of those feelings that I have about these two separate but also joined parts of my identity.